That's your song? You're smiling so hard. You think you can hear me too?
The statewide period of mourning issued by Governor Jeff Landry in remembrance of the 14 lives lost in that terrorist attack continues today. Today will honor Nakira Ditto. Her mother, Melissa, described her daughter as a popular person who was always surrounded by her friends. And that sentiment was echoed by a friend who was with her at the time of the attack. She says she was, quote, a little ball of sunshine. The Gulfport native will be laid to rest on Friday.
In the early hours of January 1st, 2025, Bourbon Street in New Orleans, Louisiana was experiencing peak New Year's Eve activity, with thousands of pedestrians occupying the corridor. At approximately 3:15 a.m., a pickup truck driven by Shamsuddin Bahar Jabbar, a 42-year-old Texas resident, entered the pedestrian-restricted area at a high rate of speed. The vehicle traveled several blocks through dense foot traffic, striking numerous individuals and causing widespread disruption. Street furniture was overturned and victims were left across the roadway. After exiting the vehicle, Jabbar engaged responding officers from the New Orleans Police Department and was fatally shot during the confrontation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation later classified the incident as an act of domestic terrorism. Among the deceased was Nakira Cheyenne Ditto, an 18-year-old visitor from Gulfport, Mississippi. Subsequent examination of the scene by federal and local authorities revealed multiple firearms, suspected improvised explosive devices, and digital materials indicating advanced planning. Investigators immediately raised questions regarding access control failures, incomplete protective barriers, and missed security indicators. The events of that morning exposed systemic vulnerabilities extending beyond the actions of a single perpetrator. Every case starts with evidence and ends with truth. We examine facts, not theories, details, not drama. This is Sunday Crime, where investigations speak for themselves. Subscribe now and stay updated as we uncover the facts behind every case.
We've reported that 2 Mississippians lost their lives early that morning. 25-year-old Matthew Tenedorio and 18-year-old Nakira Ditto. Our Brandon Miguel sits down with Nakira's close friend who witnessed that horrific event unfold right in front of him.
What started as a late night of fun and celebration to ring in the new year quickly took a turn for a group of friends and family from Gulfport visiting New Orleans.
It happened in a split second, so quick that I couldn't even believe it.
17-year-old Zion Parsons.
I just remember hearing the commotion and all the loud banging.
Is describing the moment he witnessed his close friend, 18-year-old Nakira Ditto, lose her life in a matter of minutes on Bourbon Street.
I ended up seeing CCTV footage from the bar, and it showed just how quick it was coming. And a split second, as soon as we made it out the way, Nakira ran into the street and she was struck by the vehicle.
It's after a truck plowed through a crowd of people early on New Year's Day, killing Nakira and 13 others and leaving more than 30 people injured.
Hold on, get out of the way, get out of the way, get out, all the way, all the way, all the way.
Zion says he shot this video just minutes before the attack, simply capturing memories of Nakira, never realizing it would be some of her last.
Her cousin had on a blonde wig. She was easy to spot. So I saw her and I was like, where's Nye? Where's Nye? That was her nickname. I was like, where's Nye? Where's Nakira? And I'm searching for her in the crowd of people. Everybody is just looking distraught. I'm moving people out of the way. I'm like, where's Nye? Where's Nye? Where's Nye? And I turned my head and it was just her laying in the street. Yeah.
Zion's mother, Shanice Parsons, says while she's fortunate to have her child back home, she hurts inside knowing the outcome was different for others.
I could be sitting in front of this camera talking about him. And, you know, if I would have lost him, that would have, you know what I'm saying, that would have broke me. So I can just imagine, you know what I'm saying, what her mother is feeling. You know what I'm saying?
She says this is something no mother should have to experience, and both she and Zion want all children to know to always listen to their parent.
Man, I lost a very close friend of mine, but her mother lost her daughter. Yeah. And that truly just hurts more than anything.
So it's like, it's very important that, you know, just like he said, listen to your parents, because that's all you got right about then. When the world go back to normal, it's going to be me and him against his mind and what he saw.
In Gulfport, Brandy McGill, WLOX News Now.
Nikira Cheyenne Dideau was an 18-year-old resident of Gulfport, Mississippi, a coastal city known for its close-knit communities and proximity to the Mississippi Gulf Coast. She spent most of her life in Gulfport, where she was raised and educated. Her upbringing followed a stable structure rooted in family connections and community involvement. Those who knew her described her as someone who maintained consistent relationships and was regarded as dependable within her social circle. Her immediate family included her mother and extended relatives with whom she maintained regular contact. Family members played a central role in her daily life, particularly as she transitioned from adolescence into adulthood. She was not living independently at the time of her death, but was in the early stages of establishing personal responsibility and long-term goals. Her relationships with family members were described as close, with frequent communication and shared plans for her future. Academically, she had recently graduated from high school in 2024. She completed her studies without any known disciplinary issues and had expressed interest in entering the healthcare field. Following graduation, she took steps toward further education rather than delaying her plans. She was scheduled to begin a nursing program in early 2025, reflecting a defined career trajectory shortly after completing secondary school. Her aspiration to work in nursing and healthcare aligned with family influence and exposure to the profession. The decision to pursue nursing indicated long-term planning, including training, certification, and employment stability. At 18, she was at a transitional point where educational commitments were shifting toward professional development. In addition to her educational goals, Nikira had entered the workforce. She held employment while preparing for college, marking her initial steps toward financial independence. This period of her life involved balancing work responsibilities with future academic preparation, a common stage for individuals transitioning into adulthood. People familiar with Nikira described her personality as outgoing and socially engaged. She was known to interact easily with peers and maintain a consistent presence in group settings. These traits are relevant in victimology analysis because they help explain her participation in social activities, including travel and public gatherings. From a victimology perspective, Nikira's age is significant. At 18, she represented a demographic that frequently participates in public celebrations, particularly during milestone events such as New Year's Eve. Her future plans, education, career development, and employment indicate she was not engaging in high-risk behavior, but rather typical activities associated with her age group. This context is essential in understanding her presence at the location where the attack occurred. The trip to New Orleans was planned as a short New Year's celebration. Nikira traveled with a cousin and a friend, both of whom she had established relationships prior to the trip. The decision to travel was not spontaneous. It involved basic planning, coordination of transportation, and accommodation arrangements. New Orleans was selected due to its proximity to Gulfport, making it a common destination for short trips. The city's reputation for large New Year's Eve gatherings, particularly in the French Quarter, made it an expected choice for young adults seeking a celebratory environment. The group arrived in New Orleans prior to the early hours of January 1st. Their movements followed typical patterns for visitors, checking into lodging, navigating the city by foot, and spending time in high-traffic entertainment areas. Transportation within the city was largely pedestrian-based once they reached the French Quarter, where vehicle access is restricted during peak hours. Bourbon Street was chosen due to its prominence and visibility. For visitors unfamiliar with internal security logistics, the area is widely perceived as controlled and monitored, especially during major holidays. The assumption of safety was reinforced by the visible presence of crowds and the belief that high-profile locations are subject to increased security measures. There was no known perception of imminent danger. The environment appeared consistent with other large-scale public celebrations. This assumption of safety is a critical factor, as it influenced movement patterns and positioning within the crowd. In the early morning hours of January 1st, Bourbon Street was densely populated. The concentration of people was the result of extended New Year's celebrations, with foot traffic continuing well past midnight. Sidewalks, street crossings, and bar entrances were heavily congested. Alcohol consumption was widespread, contributing to slower movement and reduced situational awareness among pedestrians. The combination of intoxication, crowd density, and limited space created conditions where individuals had minimal ability to respond quickly to sudden changes. Security posture at the time was visible but limited. Police officers were present along portions of the street, primarily focused on crowd control rather than perimeter defense. Physical vehicle barriers, such as bollards, were either absent or not fully deployed at certain access points. The lack of consistent physical barriers represented a known vulnerability. Bourbon Street has multiple intersecting streets and access points that require active management to prevent unauthorized vehicle entry. On that night, at least one access point remained exposed. The ratio of police presence to crowd size was insufficient to prevent rapid intrusion by a vehicle. Officers stationed along the street could not physically stop a moving truck once it entered the pedestrian zone. These vulnerabilities existed before the attack and were later scrutinized during investigations. At approximately 3:15 a.m., a pickup truck entered Bourbon Street through a restricted access point. The vehicle accelerated into the crowd, traveling in a straight trajectory along the street. The speed of the truck exceeded what would be possible in controlled pedestrian traffic. The vehicle's path intersected directly with areas of highest foot traffic. Individuals had limited time to react due to crowd density and obstructed sight lines. Tables, barriers, and people were struck as the truck moved forward. Eyewitnesses later reported sudden impact sounds, people being thrown, and immediate confusion. The vehicle continued moving until it became disabled or stopped by obstacles. Nikira Cheyenne Dado was among those struck during the vehicle's advance. The impact occurred within seconds of the truck entering the street. Those nearby were unable to intervene or provide immediate assistance due to the ongoing threat and confusion. In the immediate aftermath, the driver exited the vehicle. The situation escalated rapidly as law enforcement moved to engage the suspect. Civilians fled the area while others attempted to assist the injured. Officers on scene reacted quickly once the vehicle attack was identified. The driver engaged law enforcement, leading to an exchange of gunfire. The suspect was neutralized within minutes. Officers then focused on securing the area. The street was cleared to prevent secondary threats, and potential explosive devices were treated as credible risks. Emergency medical services initiated triage procedures. Victims were categorized based on injury severity and transported to multiple hospitals across the city. Coordination between agencies was critical due to the number of casualties. Fatalities were identified once scenes were stabilized. Notifications were conducted after confirmation procedures were completed. First responders faced challenges including crowd panic, debris, limited access routes, and the possibility of secondary attacks. The response phase continued for hours as investigators processed the scene and medical teams treated survivors. The incident was later classified as a terrorist attack, marking it as one of the most significant mass casualty events in the city's recent history. Investigators secured Bourbon Street within minutes of the attack and began a methodical examination of the scene. The primary focus was the pickup truck used in the incident. The vehicle showed extensive frontal damage consistent with repeated high-speed impacts against pedestrians and street fixtures. Its path through the pedestrian corridor was reconstructed using skid marks, debris patterns, and surveillance footage. The truck had not shown signs of mechanical failure, indicating intentional operation rather than loss of control. Inside the vehicle, law enforcement recovered multiple firearms. These included at least one semi-automatic rifle and a handgun, both loaded. Ballistics analysis later confirmed that rounds fired during the incident matched the weapons recovered. No evidence suggested the firearms were discharged prior to the suspect exiting the vehicle, reinforcing the assessment that the vehicle itself was the primary weapon. Investigators also identified suspected explosive devices located near the attack zone. These devices were later determined to be improvised and placed in coolers positioned along nearby streets. Bomb technicians analyzed their components, which included wiring, containers, and triggering mechanisms. Although none of the devices detonated, their presence elevated the incident from a single-method attack to a multi-threat scenario. The placement of the devices suggested intent to cause secondary harm, potentially targeting first responders or additional civilians. Their locations were consistent with areas of heavy foot traffic, reinforcing the assessment of premeditation. Street surveillance cameras provided critical footage. City-owned cameras captured the vehicle entering restricted areas, while privately owned cameras from businesses and hotels offered multiple angles of the truck's movement. Cell phone videos from bystanders further filled gaps, showing real-time reactions and confirming the speed and direction of travel.
Digital evidence recovered from the suspect included mobile devices and online accounts. Investigators extracted search histories, stored videos, and messages that indicated planning activity in the weeks leading up to the attack. The suspect was identified as a middle-aged male from Texas. Demographic records confirmed his age, residency, and citizenship status. He had previously served in the U.S. military, with records indicating honorable discharge. His service history included training that may have contributed to operational planning skills. Following military service, the suspect maintained intermittent employment in technical and manual labor roles. Co-workers later described him as functional but increasingly isolated. There were no indications of stable long-term relationships, and his personal life appeared fragmented. Prior interactions with law enforcement were limited. No major violent offenses were documented, though minor encounters suggested escalating instability rather than criminal escalation. There was no active warrant at the time of the attack. In the months leading up to January 2025, behavioral changes became evident. Digital records showed increased consumption of extremist material, shifts in online rhetoric, and withdrawal from routine social contact. Travel records confirmed that the suspect made deliberate arrangements to be in New Orleans during the New Year's holiday period. Preparation patterns included vehicle acquisition, weapon access, and reconnaissance. Surveillance footage suggested he had scouted the area in advance, familiarizing himself with traffic restrictions and pedestrian flows. Evidence also indicated ideological influence. Flags, symbols, and digital statements pointed to extremist alignment, though investigators initially debated whether this reflected genuine affiliation or ideological imitation. Federal authorities identified multiple indicators of premeditation. These included advanced travel planning, device construction, and digital recordings created prior to the attack. The absence of spontaneous triggers supported the conclusion that the act was planned. Investigators recovered statements and recorded messages made by the suspect before the incident. These materials referenced grievances and ideological narratives consistent with extremist propaganda. The use of symbolism, including specific flags and language, was interpreted as deliberate messaging rather than coincidence. Authorities examined whether the suspect acted alone or as part of a broader network. No direct operational links to known organizations were identified. Financial records and communication logs showed no coordination with external actors, leading investigators to classify the suspect as a lone actor inspired by extremist ideology rather than directed by it. Based on federal criteria, the incident met the threshold for terrorism classification. The use of violence to intimidate civilians, ideological motivation, and targeting of a public space aligned with statutory definitions. This classification shaped investigatory priorities, including national security reviews and intelligence assessments. Victims ranged widely in age, occupation, and geographic origin. Most were pedestrians engaged in routine New Year's celebrations. The randomness of victim selection was a defining characteristic of the attack. Nikira Cheyenne Dideo was vulnerable due to situational exposure rather than targeted intent. She was located within a high-density pedestrian zone at the time the vehicle entered. There was no evidence she was specifically targeted. The attack did not discriminate by individual characteristics. Instead, it relied on location and crowd density. Survivors who were with Nikira experienced immediate exposure to the event, including physical danger and sensory overload. Long-term consequences for witnesses included documented psychological effects, such as post-event stress responses. These impacts were recorded through medical follow-ups and victim assistance programs. Post-incident reviews revealed multiple security vulnerabilities. City safety planning acknowledged Bourbon Street as a high-risk zone, yet protective measures were incomplete at the time of the attack. Bollards and vehicle barriers designed to prevent unauthorized access were either absent, under maintenance, or not fully deployed. Construction timelines and delayed installations created temporary gaps that were exploited. Communication gaps between agencies contributed to fragmented situational awareness. While multiple departments were present, coordination protocols for mass crowd vehicle threats were insufficiently enforced. Crowd control failures included limited perimeter enforcement and reliance on temporary measures rather than permanent infrastructure. Analysts later concluded that the attack may have been mitigated through physical barriers and improved access control. City officials issued initial statements emphasizing investigation over accountability. Law enforcement briefings controlled early narratives, focusing on suspect neutralization rather than systemic analysis. Federal agencies assumed investigatory leadership, integrating local findings into a broader terrorism framework. Internal reviews were launched to assess preparedness and response. After-action reports highlighted procedural shortcomings and infrastructure delays. Civil liability considerations emerged, particularly regarding barrier maintenance and public safety obligations. Families of victims demanded transparency, requesting detailed explanations of how security measures failed and whether warnings were ignored. Early media reports contained inaccuracies that were later corrected. Initial framing shifted from accident to terrorism as evidence emerged. Official language evolved to reflect federal involvement and ideological findings. National security discussions followed, focusing on domestic threat prevention. Public debate centered on crowd safety, infrastructure investment, and urban security policy. Nikira's story was often cited as an example of unintended civilian loss, though coverage varied in depth and accuracy. Investigations remain active, with digital evidence still under analysis. Some findings have yet to be released publicly. Unresolved questions persist regarding missed warning signs and barrier deployment decisions. Security changes have since been implemented across New Orleans. Memorials were established, marking the location and honoring victims. This case demonstrates how a public celebration became a mass casualty event through a combination of individual action and systemic vulnerability. Nikira Dideo's death highlights the consequences of security gaps in high-risk public spaces. Understanding this case extends beyond one night, informing future public safety strategies and accountability standards.